Lena had always been drawn to the old abandoned theater in town. She passed it every day on her walk to work, its once grand facade now cracked and crumbling, windows boarded up with years of dust and decay. Local legend had it that the theater was haunted, though most dismissed it as superstition. But there was something about it that intrigued her, a pull she couldn't explain. One evening, after a particularly long day, Lena found herself walking past the theater again, this time at dusk. The streets were eerily quiet and the air felt thick, as though something was pressing down on her chest. As she neared the theater's front doors, she stopped, her breath catching in her throat. There, just behind the grime-covered window, she saw a figure. A woman? Lena's heart raced as she squinted, trying to make out the details. The woman was smiling. Not just a gentle smile, but an unnatural wide grin that stretched too far beyond what any human mouth should be able to manage. The smile seemed to stretch, inch by inch, as Lena stared, transfixed. She should have walked away, should have turned around and run, but something held her there, her feet frozen in place. The woman's eyes, dark and hollow, locked onto Lena's. The smile grew impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged, blackened teeth. Without thinking, Lena stepped closer to the door, drawn by some unknown force. Her hand reached for the rusty handle. It creaked open. Inside, the theater was dark, save for a single spotlight illuminating the stage. A deep sense of foreboding washed over Lena, but she pushed forward. Her eyes scanned the empty seats, the velvet cushions faded and torn. But the woman was nowhere to be seen. Then the lights flickered. The smile returned, not on the woman's face, but in the air itself. It was carved into the shadows that clung to the walls. It spread across the theater, twisting and morphing, until Lena could no longer distinguish what was real and what was a figment of her mind. A voice echoed through the room, soft at first, but then growing louder and clearer. "Smile, Lena." Lena spun around, heart pounding. The stage was empty, but the voice was everywhere. It was inside her head now, whispering, taunting, urging her to smile, to embrace the twisted grin. She ran, out of the theater, down the street, her feet pounding against the pavement. She didn't stop until she reached her apartment, panting and trembling. Her hands shook as she locked the door behind her. But when she passed by the mirror, her reflection caught her off guard. There it was, the smile. Her own face twisted unnaturally, stretching, the corners of her lips lifting higher and higher until her reflection was unrecognizable. And then she realized she was smiling.
It started with a noise. A soft scratching, like the sound of something clawing against the inside of the walls. At first, Sarah thought it was just the house settling, old wood creaking under the pressure of time. But as the days wore on, the noise grew louder, more insistent. She moved into the old house on the outskirts of town, desperate for a fresh start. It was cheap, a steal really, and the realtor had warned her that the place had a history. That was all she needed to hear before signing the papers. After all, she wasn't one to believe in ghosts or anything superstitious. The first night, she heard the scratching. It was faint, barely noticeable, but it disturbed her enough to lie awake, staring at the ceiling. The next night, it was louder, more distinct, almost like fingernails dragging along the plaster. She tried to ignore it, chalking it up to the house's age. But the sound continued, growing in intensity until it was impossible to ignore. Just rats, she told herself. It's probably rats. But then, one night, she woke to the unmistakable sound of whispering. Low and hushed, it slithered through the walls, murmuring words she couldn't make out. She sat up in bed, heart racing, her breath shallow. The whispers weren't just random sounds, they were purposeful, like voices trying to communicate. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice shaking. The whispering stopped, and for a long moment, the silence was deafening. Then, a single word echoed from the walls, "Leave." Sarah's blood ran cold. She wasn't alone in the house. There was something in the walls, something waiting. The next day, she went to the town library to search for any clues about the house's history. After hours of sifting through old records, she found an article buried in the back of a dusty newspaper. It told the story of a family who had lived in the house decades ago. The parents, along with their 2 children, had vanished without a trace one night. The police found no evidence of foul play, just an empty house with a strange, unsettling aura. The article mentioned that the house was rumored to be cursed, with whispers of a malevolent spirit trapped inside, waiting for a new tenant to claim it. Sarah returned home, her mind racing. She couldn't stay in the house anymore, there was no way. But as she walked through the front door, she heard the scratching again. Louder, more frantic now, as if whatever was inside the walls was trying to escape. Her heart pounded in her chest as she made her way to the living room. The walls seemed to hum with a strange energy, as if the house itself was alive. The air felt heavy, thick with something she couldn't explain. Then, she saw it. A crack in the wall, barely noticeable at first, but growing, spreading like a wound. It was as if the house was tearing itself open, revealing something hidden beneath the surface. Before she could react, a hand shot out from the crack. Pale, thin fingers grasped at the air, their skin stretched and raw. Sarah stumbled back, gasping for air. The hand withdrew, and the wall sealed itself shut, leaving only a faint, lingering scent of decay. She ran. She didn't stop until she reached the front yard, her heart hammering in her chest. The house loomed behind her, dark and silent once more. The town's sheriff found her hours later, shaking and delirious, muttering about the whispers, the hand, the curse. He listened quietly, then finally spoke. People have been disappearing around that house for years. It's never been safe. You're lucky to get out. As he spoke, Sarah looked back at the house. In the dim light of the setting sun, she swore she saw a face pressed against the window, pale, gaunt, and staring at her with hollow eyes. She never returned to the house. But the whispers stayed with her, following her wherever she went. A constant, low murmur in the back of her mind, growing louder as the days passed. She had escaped the house, but she could never escape what it had left behind.
The Hollow Feast. It was the weekend before finals, and 3 college friends, Jake, Emma, and Ben, were seeking a break from the pressure of their studies. Ben had come across an odd flyer posted on a nearby bulletin board in the student center. It advertised an underground dinner event, the Hollow Feast, promising a unique culinary experience. The flyer had no contact information, only an address in the old part of town, marked with a cryptic symbol. Emma, the adventurous one of the group, was immediately intrigued. Think about it. A secret dinner, a weird symbol, maybe it's some avant-garde thing, she said, eyes wide with excitement. Jake, skeptical as usual, raised an eyebrow. Sounds like a trap. You'll end up eating some weird animal part or get drugged. But Ben, always the follower, convinced Jake it'd be fun. Come on, man, we're in college. It's about experiences. Besides, we could use a break from studying. And who knows, maybe it'll be a story we'll tell for years. Reluctantly, Jake agreed. The address led them to a forgotten alleyway, hidden behind an old, crumbling building. At first glance, the place looked abandoned, but a dim light flickered through a cracked window. They knocked on the door. An old woman, hunched over and draped in a faded black dress, opened the door. Her pale skin seemed almost translucent, and her eyes were unnervingly wide, giving her an almost insect-like look. "You came," she said, her voice like dry leaves. "Come in, the feast is ready." Inside was a large, long table, set for many. The scent of rich, spiced food filled the air. As they walked deeper into the room, they noticed no one else was there. Just them, the woman, and a tall, gaunt man standing silently in the corner. "Where is everyone?" Ben asked, his curiosity piqued. The woman smiled, her lips stretching too wide. "This is the feast. Just you 3 tonight? Sit." Reluctantly, the group took their seats at the table. The woman placed a covered dish in front of each of them. It smelled incredible, warm and inviting, but the meat within was dark and unfamiliar. Jake's stomach churned as he looked at the meat on his plate. "What is this?" "Eat," the woman urged. "It's an experience you'll never forget." Ben, ever the curious one, picked up his fork and took a bite. His eyes widened. "Wow, this is really good." Emma followed suit, hesitant at first, but soon she was savoring every bite. Jake, though, couldn't shake the unease in his stomach. He set his fork down, glancing around. The man in the corner was still standing, watching them silently. "Something's wrong," Jake muttered. Suddenly, the man stepped forward. His face was gaunt, skin stretched tight over his skull, eyes black and hollow. "You shouldn't have eaten." Before they could react, the walls of the room seemed to bend inward, the shadows elongating. The woman's face twisted into a grotesque grin, her teeth sharp and gleaming. "The feast isn't just for you," she hissed. "It's for us." The room began to spin, and the food in front of them started to wriggle. The meat seemed to pulse, as if alive. Panic set in. Emma bolted up, knocking over her chair. "What is this?" Ben tried to move but found his body locked in place, his limbs frozen. His eyes widened in terror as he watched the man in the corner approach, his fingers elongating into sharp claws. "Welcome to the Hollow Feast," the woman whispered, "where the guests are served, and the host feast." The last thing Jake saw before the darkness took over was Ben's mouth opening in silent horror, his body being pulled toward the table as if by invisible strings. Emma screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the ever-growing shadows that wrapped around them. The Hollow Feast had claimed them.
The Lightkeeper's Curse. In a remote coastal village, perched on the edge of a jagged cliff, stood an old lighthouse that hadn't been in use for years. The village itself, tucked between steep hills and thick gray forests, was rarely visited by outsiders. A mysterious fog often rolled in from the sea, cloaking the village in an eerie haze. Its only remaining resident, an elderly man named Elias, had lived alone in the lighthouse for as long as anyone could remember. The villagers didn't speak much about him, but they all knew the stories. Stories that had been passed down through generations. Max and Rachel, both in their early 20s, had recently moved to the village. They were artists, hoping to find inspiration in the quiet, remote location. They rented a small cottage near the edge of the cliff, with a view of the lighthouse. The isolation, they thought, would be perfect for their work. But the first night they arrived, Max noticed something unusual. Through the thick fog, he saw a faint glow emanating from the lighthouse. It was odd. He knew the light was no longer functional, and yet, the beam seemed to pulse, flickering in the distance. "Look," Max said to Rachel, pointing toward the lighthouse. "The light's on. I thought it was abandoned." Rachel looked at him, a skeptical look on her face. "It's probably just the fog playing tricks on you. Or maybe it's a reflection from the cottage windows." Max wasn't convinced. That night, the glow continued to pulse, casting strange shadows on the cliffside. The following morning, they went to the local pub to grab some lunch. The bartender, an older man with a weathered face, noticed them as they sat down. "You're the new folks in the cottage, aren't you?" he asked with a gruff voice. "The lighthouse too, I suppose." Max and Rachel nodded, glancing at each other. "Watch out for that place," the bartender said, his voice dropping lower. "Elias, the old lightkeeper, never should have stayed. People say he went mad out there. Kept the light on even after they stopped needing it. And after he died, well, the light's still there, shining every night like a curse." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "The lighthouse is still working." The bartender shook his head, looking uncomfortable. "No, the light hasn't worked in years. But there's something in that fog, something from the sea. The lighthouse is like a beacon, but not for ships. It's for something else." That night, the glow from the lighthouse was even brighter, and this time, it seemed to be beckoning them. Max and Rachel felt an overwhelming urge to go to it, as if something inside them was pulling them toward the old lighthouse. They walked through the thick fog, their footsteps muffled on the wet ground. As they neared the lighthouse, the temperature dropped, the air turning heavy and suffocating. The door to the lighthouse stood ajar. Without thinking, Max pushed it open. Inside, the place smelled of mildew and decay. The walls were lined with old photographs of ships, but one picture caught Max's eye: an old, faded portrait of Elias standing proudly in front of the lighthouse. But what was strange was the look in his eyes. They were wild, manic, as if he had been staring into something that drove him to madness. The beam of light suddenly flared brightly, casting an unnatural glow that filled the room. Max and Rachel both froze as a shadow appeared at the top of the spiral staircase. A figure, thin and frail, with the same wild, haunting eyes from the photograph. Elias. He spoke in a voice that seemed to echo through the walls. "You've come to take my place, haven't you? The light must never go out. It calls. It calls to those who are lost. To those who are hungry." The room grew colder, and the light seemed to pulse in time with Elias's words. Max and Rachel backed away, but the door slammed shut, trapping them inside. The light flickered again, and suddenly, they could hear faint whispers, as if the voices of long-forgotten souls were calling to them from the fog outside. Elias's figure moved toward them, his mouth stretching into a twisted grin. "The curse. It's passed on. Now you will light the way. You will feed the hunger." The beam of light shot outward, a piercing force that engulfed them both. As Max reached out for Rachel, his vision blurred and everything went dark. When the villagers woke the next morning, the fog had lifted, but the lighthouse was glowing brighter than ever. They could see nothing of Max or Rachel, but when they visited the lighthouse, they found the door wide open. Inside, the pictures on the walls had changed. The portrait of Elias was gone, replaced by a new one: Max and Rachel, their eyes wide, their expressions vacant, standing in front of the lighthouse with the same crazed look as Elias once had. And the light, it never stopped shining.
The delivery. Kyle had been working at Mama's Pizza for almost a year, but tonight felt different. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the thick fog rolling in over the city, or the fact that his manager had sent him out for the last delivery of the night to a strange, out-of-the-way address. "Don't take too long, kid. That place is... well, it's not where you want to be alone," his manager had warned, his voice low. Kyle had laughed it off, assuming it was just another one of those creepy old house stories. He didn't believe in any of that nonsense. As he navigated the narrow, winding streets in his delivery car, he glanced at the address again. It was a mansion on the edge of town, one of those creepy, rundown places that didn't look like it belonged in the city anymore. When Kyle finally reached the house, he hesitated for a moment. The porch light flickered, casting eerie shadows on the dilapidated steps. He shrugged, grabbed the pizza bag, and walked up to the door. Before he could knock, the door creaked open. Standing in the doorway was a man, a tall, thin figure, his face pale and expressionless. His eyes were sunken, dark circles beneath them, and his clothes were oddly formal for someone living in a place like this. "You're the delivery boy," the man said, his voice a raspy whisper. "Come inside." Kyle, feeling a strange unease, stepped in. The interior of the house was dim, the air stale. The man didn't lead him to a kitchen or dining room. Instead, he guided him through dark hallways, lined with strange portraits of people he didn't recognize. They all seemed to be staring at him, their eyes unblinking, their mouths set in eerie, unnatural smiles. As they reached a large sitting room, the man stopped and turned to him. "The pizza's for me." "And for them." Kyle's throat tightened. "What do you mean, for them?" Suddenly, Kyle heard something soft, dragging footsteps from behind him. He spun around, but no one was there. The man smiled, showing too many teeth. "Come, see." He led Kyle to the back of the room where an old wooden door was slightly ajar. As the door creaked open, a cold, musty smell filled the air. Kyle's heart raced as he saw what lay beyond dozens of people, sitting motionless in chairs. Their faces were pale, their eyes empty, and their bodies stiff, as though they had been frozen in time. Some were even holding forks and knives still, as if in the middle of a meal. "They're waiting," the man whispered. Kyle's mind raced. His stomach churned with dread. "Who, Dot?" "Who are they?" "The feast," the man replied. "They've been waiting for years. You brought the last part." Before Kyle could react, the door slammed shut behind him, locking him in the room. The man's smile widened as the figures around him began to stir. Slowly, they reached for the pizza, their hands cold and unfeeling. And as Kyle turned to run, the last thing he heard was the man's voice. Cold as ice, no one leaves the feast. The door wouldn't open, and the pizza was cold.
The harvesting. 3 friends, Nate, Sarah, and Tom, had been planning their weekend trip for months. They were looking for a getaway from the stress of their college lives. A friend of Sarah's had mentioned a cabin out in the woods, far enough off the beaten path to escape the usual noise, but close enough for a fun, relaxing weekend. Sarah called up the owner, an older woman named Agnes, who was more than happy to rent the place out. The cabin was quaint, nestled in the forest and surrounded by tall trees. It looked just like the pictures. They spent the first day hiking, enjoying the fresh air, and laughing. The isolation felt good, no emails, no assignments, no distractions. That night, they gathered around the fireplace, sipping wine and talking about their plans for the future. But as the night wore on, something felt off. The wind outside began to pick up, howling through the trees, sending a chill through the cabin. A knock on the door startled them. Nate got up to answer, expecting it to be the neighbor or perhaps a ranger. But when he opened the door, no one was there. He shrugged, stepping back inside. As he turned around, he saw something glinting on the doorstep, a small, silver key. "Found this on the doorstep," Nate said, holding it up. The 3 friends stared at the key, confusion written across their faces. "Is it for something here?" Sarah asked, eyeing the old wooden cabin with suspicion. "I don't know," Nate replied, pocketing the key. But the unease lingered. The next day, they explored the cabin further. It was old but charming, with creaky floors and dusty windows. In one of the upstairs rooms, Nate found an old chest hidden under the floorboards. The chest was locked, but the key fit perfectly. Inside, they found a strange assortment of items, an old book, a set of candles, and a jar of what looked like dried herbs. "What the hell is this?" Tom asked, flipping through the pages of the book. It was filled with strange symbols and notes, many of them written in a language none of them could recognize. As they examined the chest and the items inside, the door to the room slammed shut and the lights flickered. The temperature dropped. A voice, low and raspy, echoed through the room. "You should not have opened it." The 3 of them spun around, but there was no one there. Suddenly, the walls seemed to close in around them. The air grew thick, suffocating. Nate dropped the book and tried to get to the door, but it was locked. Sarah screamed as the floor beneath them seemed to tremble. The voice spoke again, this time clearer. "You've disturbed the harvest. You've taken what isn't yours." Then, the shadows in the corners of the room began to move. Figures emerged from the walls, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Their limbs were long and twisted, their faces pale and gaunt. Sarah backed into a corner, her eyes wide with terror. "What are they?" "They are the ones who harvest," the voice said. "The harvest of souls." The figures advanced slowly, their faces twisting into grotesque smiles. The door finally swung open, but it didn't matter. As the friends tried to run, the shadows wrapped around them, pulling them back into the darkness of the cabin. Outside, the wind howled again, but there was no one left to hear it. The harvest had come.
The midnight caller. It had been months since Claire moved into the old farmhouse on the outskirts of town. Her new life was supposed to be peaceful, a quiet retreat from the bustle of city living. The house, though worn and weathered, had a charm to it. The creaking floors, the drafty windows, the overgrown garden, all of it felt like home. But lately, something was off. It started with the phone calls. At first, they were harmless. Just odd hang-ups, static-filled calls that came late at night. She chalked it up to a wrong number, a prank, or maybe just a faulty line. But then the calls began to happen more frequently, always at midnight. The same eerie static followed by a voice, a whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable. Claire. Her heart would race every time the phone rang, the voice sending chills down her spine. She'd pick up the receiver only to be met with silence on the other end. The whispers came every night. At first, they were soft, almost comforting in their predictability. But as the days passed, the voice grew clearer, more distinct. Claire Dot. I'm here. It wasn't tea until she decided to stay up late and wait for the call that things took a darker turn. That night, she sat in the dim glow of her living room, watching the clock as it ticked closer to midnight. Her fingers tightened around the phone. She was determined to face whatever this was. At exactly midnight, the phone rang. She picked up the receiver, her breath shallow. Silence. Then the whisper, I see you. The voice was no longer faint, but sharp, cold, and unmistakably close. Claire's blood ran cold. She slammed the phone down, heart pounding in her chest. Her eyes darted around the room, scanning the corners, the shadows. Something felt wrong. Too wrong. The next night, she was ready again. As the clock struck midnight, the phone rang. Her hand shook as she picked up the receiver, but this time, there was no whisper. Just the sound of heavy breathing. Her pulse quickened. The breathing was too close. It sounded like it was right beside her. She could almost feel the warmth of it against her ear. I'm in your house. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She dropped the receiver and spun around, her heart racing. The room was empty, just as it had been seconds before. But then she heard its soft footsteps coming from upstairs, slow and deliberate. Her heart skipped a beat. The footsteps were too heavy to be her own, too intentional. Someone was in her house. Claire grabbed a kitchen knife and crept up the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. The house was quiet now, too quiet. No more footsteps, no more whispers. Just the oppressive silence of something waiting. At the top of the stairs, she froze. In the hallway at the far end stood a shadow. A figure, tall and thin, its face obscured by the darkness. The moonlight filtered through the window, illuminating just enough to reveal the glint of something sharp in its hand. Claire's breath caught in her throat. The figure took a step toward her, and the door to the attic creaked open behind her. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, Claire bolted for the attic, the figure's footsteps echoing behind her. She slammed the door shut, pressing her back against it, gasping for breath. She turned to face the room, the dust and cobwebs of the attic filling her nose. And there in the far corner, hanging from the ceiling by a thick rope, was a phone, its receiver still connected to the wall. It had been there all along. It was never a caller. The figure outside the door whispered through the thin wood, low and raspy. I've been waiting for you, Claire, ... And Claire finally understood. She hadn't been getting calls. The calls were just the beginning. She was the one who had been called, summoned to this house, to this moment. And now there was no escaping.
The reflection. Megan had always loved mirrors. She adored the way they captured moments, frozen in time. Her grandmother had a beautiful old mirror in her home, a family heirloom passed down for generations. It was large, its frame intricately carved with symbols she didn't fully understand, but there was something captivating about it. As a child, Megan would often stand before it, fascinated by the reflection that stared back at her. There was a sense of mystery there, as if the mirror held secrets. When Megan's grandmother passed away, the mirror was left to her. The moment she laid eyes on it again, standing in her grandmother's dusty old house, she knew it belonged with her. It was heavy, the glass thick and clear. She could see the faintest traces of the past etched in the surface, as though it had witnessed a lifetime of moments. Megan decided it would be perfect for her new apartment. The first night she hung the mirror in her bedroom, she felt a strange comfort. There was something about it that made her feel safe, as though the mirror was keeping watch over her. But as the days passed, Megan began to notice small things. Nothing major, just odd little details that didn't quite add up. One evening, she stood in front of the mirror to adjust her hair. She was tired, the exhaustion of work weighing on her. As she watched her reflection, she noticed something strange, a subtle movement in the corner of the glass. It wasn't much at first, just a shadow darting across the surface. She turned around quickly, but no one was there. "Megan, you're just imagining things," she muttered to herself. She shook her head and dismissed it. But the next night, it happened again. She was brushing her teeth, and out of the corner of her eye, she saw it, someone, or something, moving just behind her in the reflection. She spun around, heart racing, but the room was empty. The shadows played tricks, she told herself, still trying to rationalize it. The third night was different. She was lying in bed, reading a book, when she felt a strange sensation, cold, almost as if the room had gotten colder. She glanced at the mirror, and for a brief moment, she swore she saw someone standing behind her in the reflection. But when she turned her head to look, no one was there. The air felt heavier, like something was pressing down on her chest. Megan sat up in bed, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure what she was seeing anymore. Was it her tired mind playing tricks on her? Or was there something more sinister going on? The next day, she tried to contact a local antique dealer to learn more about the mirror. She wondered if it was cursed or if something had been attached to it over the years. The dealer seemed intrigued when she described it. "Ah, that mirror," he said over the phone. "That's no ordinary piece. It's been passed through your family for generations, right? You should be careful with it. Sometimes, mirrors don't just reflect what's in front of them, they show what's behind the glass. And not everything in the reflection is meant to be seen." Megan hung up the phone, her stomach sinking. She had a growing feeling that the mirror wasn't just a window to her own world. It was a doorway, and whatever was trapped inside was trying to escape. That night, Megan decided to stay up and keep watch. She turned off the lights and sat in the darkness, staring at the mirror, waiting for something to happen. The air grew thick with tension, and just as she was beginning to doubt herself, she saw it. A figure appeared in the reflection, a tall, dark silhouette standing just behind her. Its features were distorted, blurry, as if the reflection itself were struggling to hold its shape. Megan's breath caught in her throat as she slowly turned her head. No one was there. The room was empty. But the figure didn't disappear. It was still there, standing behind her, its form clearer now, a dark, indistinct shape that seemed to stretch and twist like smoke. As Megan stared at the reflection, she felt a cold hand on her shoulder, no, not on her shoulder, but inside her reflection. The hand reached up, curling toward her neck. The reflection was moving on its own. In a panic, Megan scrambled to get out of bed. She turned toward the mirror, but as her reflection moved, it did not follow. It remained fixed, its eerie figure now staring back at her with hollow eyes. Megan couldn't move, she was frozen in place. The figure in the mirror started to smile, a grotesque, gaping grin that stretched wider and wider until it seemed to fill the entire glass. Megan stumbled back, her hands shaking as she tried to tear the mirror off the wall. The reflection in the glass was still smiling, its eyes following her every move. The moment the mirror crashed to the floor, the figure vanished. The room was silent, save for Megan's frantic breathing. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the shattered glass, the weight of her fear suffocating her. The figure was gone, but Megan knew it wasn't over. The reflection would always be there, somewhere, waiting for her. And the mirror wasn't the only one that could see into her world.
The last game.
The gaming world was a place of fantasy where players could escape the mundane and live out their wildest adventures. But for 4 college friends, Jasper, Olivia, Nathan, and Lana, their gaming experience was about to become something far darker than they had ever anticipated. It all began when Nathan found a strange game disc at a local thrift store. It was old, dusty, with a simple label that read "The Last Game." There were no other markings, no clues about its origins. Intrigued, Nathan bought it, thinking it was a rare collector's item. He shared it with his friends that weekend. "You guys have to try this. It looks different," Nathan said, holding the disc up. Olivia, a tech-savvy gamer, shrugged. "It's old. It probably doesn't even work." But when they popped the disc into Nathan's old gaming console, the screen flickered to life, showing an eerie, cryptic menu. The characters were grim and the atmosphere was unsettling, but they didn't hesitate. They clicked Start Game. The game's world was dark, filled with twisted landscapes, strange creatures, and shadowy figures lurking in every corner. It was a survival horror game, but there was something wrong about it. The deeper they played, the more immersed they became in the world. As they progressed, they noticed that their in-game characters began to change, taking on traits of their real selves. Olivia's character developed a strange scar on her face. Nathan's grew a nervous tic. Lana's hands in the game began to tremble uncontrollably. "This is ... not normal," Lana said, her voice shaky. "Why does my character look like me?" Jasper, always the skeptic, laughed. "It's just a glitch. Don't get all weird on us." But as they ventured deeper into the game, things started to spiral out of control. The game seemed to know more about them than it should. It would occasionally show personalized messages on the screen, things that only they knew. "You've been here before. Why did you leave?" And then the messages started to change. "You can't leave. You can't escape." The room grew cold, and the lights flickered. As Olivia's character entered a darkened cave, a shadowy figure appeared. It was a mirror image of her, only its eyes were completely black, devoid of any emotion. It moved toward her character in the game. "You shouldn't have come," it whispered. "This is your last game." Suddenly, the room seemed to warp around them. The friends were pulled into the game, their bodies frozen in place. The figures from the game emerged, stepping into their world, the shadows stretching across the walls like living tendrils. "We need to shut it off," Nathan screamed, but the console was unresponsive, the power button flickering uselessly. The figures advanced, their eyes locked on the 4 friends. The world around them blurred and twisted, the boundaries between the game and reality becoming indistinguishable. "You've played the last game," a voice echoed, chilling them to the core. And with that, the room went dark. The screen, now black, displayed one final message: "Game over." When the police arrived hours later, they found the console powered down, the room cold and empty. The game disc was still in the console, the words "The Last Game" etched in the corner, but no one could find Jasper, Olivia, Nathan, or Lana. They were never heard from again. And the game? It kept playing over and over, waiting for its next players. The Forgotten Carousel. Lydia had always been fascinated by old amusement parks. There was something about the decay of once vibrant rides and attractions that intrigued her. How time, neglect, and weather could turn something joyful into something haunting. When she saw the flyer for the pop-up vintage carnival, advertising a temporary amusement park setting up in a small town near the woods, she couldn't resist. The flyer promised vintage rides, old games, and a nostalgic atmosphere, all set in a secluded area that would give it an authentic feel. Lydia, an aspiring photographer, saw it as the perfect opportunity to capture something unique for her portfolio. She convinced her friends, Erin, Claire, and Vince, to join her. They all packed into her car and drove down the winding roads. eventually reaching the outskirts of a small, dilapidated town. The air was thick with mist as they approached the carnival grounds, nestled deep in the forest. The park itself seemed out of place, almost as if it had been transported from another time. The rustic gates creaked open as they entered, revealing a strange collection of vintage carnival rides, old Ferris wheels, a rickety tilt-a-whirl, and a carousel that seemed to stand out from the rest. The horses on the carousel were painted in bright colors, but their eyes, empty, hollow sockets, sent a shiver down Lydia's spine. Despite the eerie appearance, the park was filled with visitors, all strangely silent, as if under some shared spell. The carnival workers, dressed in tattered uniforms, moved slowly and mechanically, guiding visitors to the rides and games. The smell of caramel apples and popcorn lingered in the air, but it was faint, almost as if the food stalls were only there for show, with no one actually eating. The atmosphere was thick, oppressive, and Lydia couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "I'm gonna go get some shots," Lydia said, breaking the silence. "I want to capture the beauty of this place, even if it's a little creepy." Erin, Claire, and Vince nodded, agreeing to meet her later near the Ferris wheel. As Lydia wandered deeper into the park, she couldn't help but notice the strange behavior of the visitors. They walked in the same direction, their faces blank, their eyes unfocused. No one spoke. No one seemed to smile. It was as though they were moving in a trance. She finally arrived at the carousel. The music, an old warped melody, played softly from hidden speakers. She stepped closer to one of the horses, the paint chipped and peeling, the mane frazzled. Something in the horse's eyes caught her attention. It was as though it were alive, watching her. Her heart skipped a beat. She took a photo of it anyway, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in her stomach. Behind her, a voice spoke, low and gravely. "Would you like a ride?" Lydia turned around. An older man stood there, his clothes dusty and old-fashioned, as if he had stepped out of another era. His face was lined with age, his eyes sunken. "Excuse me?" Lydia asked, her voice faltering. "The carousel." "A ride for the brave," he said, his smile unsettling. Lydia felt a cold chill run down her spine. "No, thank you. I'm just here to take pictures." The man's smile faded, and he nodded slowly. "All rides come with a price. The carousel is special. You should ride it." His words hung in the air, and Lydia felt an urge to walk away. But before she could, the ground beneath her seemed to shift, and she found herself standing in front of the carousel, unable to move. The horses began to move, slowly at first, their painted eyes following her every step. Without realizing it, Lydia found herself climbing onto one of the horses, her legs moving of their own accord. The music grew louder, the warped melody now a twisted lullaby. As soon as she mounted the horse, the carousel began to spin, slowly at first, but then faster and faster. The world blurred around her, the fog thickening as she was carried through the mist. The people watching from the sidelines seemed distant, like shadows motionless, their eyes locked on her. The lights around the carousel flickered, casting long, distorted shadows. Lydia's head spun. She tried to scream, but the words wouldn't come. Her hands gripped the horse tightly as the spinning grew more intense, and then it stopped. The carousel jerked to a halt, and Lydia was thrown from her horse, landing heavily on the ground. Dazed and confused, she struggled to stand. When she looked around, the park had changed. The once vibrant carnival had turned dark, its colors muted and faded. The rides were empty, the stalls were abandoned. The once silent visitors had disappeared, except for the workers. They now stood still, like statues, their eyes fixed on Lydia, the same haunted, empty gaze she had seen in the visitors earlier. She turned to look at the carousel. The horses were now still, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. And in the reflection of the glass, she saw something she couldn't explain: her own face, twisted in agony, but not her own reflection. It was a distorted, contorted version of herself, as if something was trying to take over her body. A voice echoed around her, deep and hollow. The ride never ends. Lydia's heart pounded in her chest as the workers began to move toward her, their steps slow and deliberate. They spoke in unison. "Come join us. The price is paid. You are the new keeper." Lydia stumbled backward, realizing that the carnival wasn't just a place, it was a trap. A place where souls were trapped forever, forced to become part of the carnival's dark legacy. And now she had taken her place among them. As the fog enveloped her, Lydia felt herself being pulled toward the carousel once more, her body moving against her will. The last thing she saw before the darkness swallowed her was the smile of the old man, watching her from the shadows. The carnival was never really abandoned. It was just waiting,